So thank you to everyone who is introducing yourself in the chat. We're very happy to have all of you here. I'm going to go ahead and get started with some of the introductions. My name is Geneva Blackmer. I'm the interim director for the Interfaith Center at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that seeks to unify people through relationship building, dialogue, and social action. And I'm very happy to welcome you all today to the panel discussion on the role of religious actors in solving conflicts, lessons learned from Srebrenica, Rwanda, and Northern Ireland. And today's program is co-sponsored by the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council. So I'm going to turn it over briefly to the current chair, Alan Edelman, to tell you a little bit more about our partner organization.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. The Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council is comprised of 22 faith communities. It's been in existence since the late 90s, I'm pretty sure. I guess I should have that down by now. A very vibrant organization with lots of programming and collaboration with other organizations and speakers bureau, and we do what we can to promote interfaith dialogue. And I happened to have arrived in Jerusalem, Israel this morning, where I'm here for a seminar, 10-day seminar, and I had dinner with a very dear Christian friend of Arab Palestinian friend of mine from our partnership Ramla, and we talked about how the role of religion can help us better understand the crises that are existing around the world. And I told him about this program, and he was not only excited, but very impressed. He wished he could have participated, but he's driving back to Ramla, was kind enough to come to Jerusalem so I could jump on at 9 o'clock in the evening, Jerusalem time. So welcome everybody, and I hope this is fruitful, productive, and help us all. None of us can change the situation, unfortunately, but we can help others understand it through the lens of faith.
Thank you so much, Alan. So we have three wonderful panelists here with us today, and I'm going to briefly introduce each of them, but I will put their full-length bios in the chat in case you are interested in learning more about their work. So our first speaker will be the Reverend Dr. Gary Mason, who is a Methodist minister and directs a conflict transformation organization based in Belfast called Rethinking Conflict. Prior to this, he spent 27 years as a Methodist clergy person in parish ministry in Belfast and has played an integral role in the Northern Irish peace process. He holds a PhD in psychology from the University of Ulster, completed his theological studies at Queen's University, and has a bachelor's in business studies from the University of Ulster. Gary was awarded an honorary doctorate from Florida Southern College for his work in peace building in Ireland. He's a senior research fellow at the Edward Kennedy Institute for Conflict Intervention at Maynooth University in Ireland, and a visiting professor at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Atlanta, lecturing on reconciliation, peace building, and the history of the Northern Ireland conflict, racism, sectarianism, and conflict transformation. He's an affiliated expert and partner to the Negotiation Strategies Institute, a Harvard University program on negotiation for Israelis and Palestinians and international diplomats. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary to kick us off.
Okay, hello everyone. I know it's kind of some good evenings, good mornings, good afternoons, etc. It's definitely good evening here from Belfast. As you can see, it's 7 p.m. at night, just 2 hours behind my colleague Alan there in Jerusalem. So as Geneva said, I'm a Methodist clergy person spearheading NGO, Rethinking Conflict, primarily working in 3 regions, still working in the Irish context, even 26 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Our peace process is called the process because it's still ongoing. I also work pretty extensively in the US in a number of different settings, but particularly with the Carter Center in Atlanta, facilitating conversations between faith-based actors who designate politically as Republicans and those who designate as Democrats. And I also work pretty extensively in the Middle East. I've hosted around 1,200 Israelis and Palestinians in Belfast and Dublin over the last 10 plus years. So just to highlight a few things, I think with about 10 minutes each of us, and then we're going to move into a conversation. I mean, I grew up in that Northern Irish context, and I know the power of words. I use the word Northern Ireland. Those from the British tradition would use that. Irish nationalists call it the North or the Six Counties. Israelis and Palestinians know the power of words. Is it the War of Independence? The Nakba? Is it Israel, Palestine, the West Bank, Judea, or Samaria? So even the very language we use as human beings defines our kind of politics in so many ways. If I was to kind of rewind the DVD to the early 1990s, there were many conflicts, but three conflicts primarily were grabbing world attention: Northern Ireland, South Africa, Israel, and Palestine. Most people saw apartheid slowly and very painfully coming to an end in South Africa. And most people assumed that with the Oslo Accords, Israelis and Palestinians were over the line. It has seemed to be the Irish conflict was the big intractable one of the day. Here we are 30 years later, and the intractable one is the one that we're highlighting tonight, namely the Holy Land or the Israeli-Palestinian theatre. Looking at conflicts, most of them seem to have three main elements at their core. Land. This land is my land, not your land. Identity. My identity is superior to your identity. Religion, or my interpretation of the sacred texts, is superior to how you have interpreted those sacred texts. Those Israelis and Palestinians that have been with me in Belfast and Dublin, not saying the Good Friday Agreement is a blueprint for the Middle East, because it isn't. But there's certain things we got right in our context, certain things we get wrong, that I think of applicability to the Middle East. And then all those different groups we've had, and we've had a bun here from Shas, Jewish Home, Arab Joint List, academics, many NGOs as well. They highlight invariably 5 lessons that they would see from the Northern Ireland peace process that have applicability to the Middle East. The first one is political leadership is essential to achieving peace. In the early 1990s, we had here what was kind of called a mutually hurting stalemate, which simply meant there was never going to be an outright winner on either side. So very simply put, the British Army could have contained the IRA forever. The IRA is a terrorist organization, freedom fighters, paramilitaries, non-state actors, whatever definition you want to use, were never going to defeat the British Army. The loyalist groupings or the pro-state British non-state actors were not going to defeat the IRA. So they evolved within our space leadership politically on both sides that actually believed that change was preferable to the status quo. The second concept that Israelis and Palestinians highlight looking at our space is this: there was an actual desire to break the cycle of violence to save future generations from the horrors of conflict. And that emerged in both our respective constituencies. And that desire for a better future encouraged religious actors, political actors, academics to take risks and face down accusations of betrayal from within their own communities to achieve peace. Interestingly, every Palestinian and Israeli group that have been with me in Belfast invariably say to me, "Gary, you're not getting this. You don't understand." And I say, "Tell me what I not understand." Israelis and Palestinians, we don't trust each other. And I take them back to when I was a very, very young clergy person, many years ago, late 80s, early 90s, when a group of religious actors, of which I was the youngest, began acting as back channels or interlocutors, to use a technical word, into those who were pursuing political violence. And I kind of teasingly say to them, "Do you really think the first time we were in the room together, we were hugging and kissing each other, we were popping bottles of champagne? People in the room hated each other." So you cannot continue to use a lack of trust as a prerequisite for not beginning a dialogue. Those dialogues are all secret. Meeting commitments, building confidence through concrete actions. We also realized in the early 1990s we had enough weaponry in the island of Ireland to kill each other for another 50 years. And so military force was ultimately futile. You kill one of us, we kill one of you. So real security was eventually achieved when dialogue was prioritized, the actual root causes of the conflict were addressed by the establishment of new political frameworks, political institutions that gave each community the vision and the space to pursue their political future. And the fifth lesson really is the role of civic society. Politicians work on the assumption that once a deal is done, societal healing automatically follows. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. And that's why I would firmly suggest and underline this is where religious actors can play a very, very key role in relation to this whole concept. But I think also just to highlight that those of us coming at this from a religious perspective need to be honest. I mean, religion, as we all know, can be an amazing force for good. It can be a very, very destructive force for bad. I'm not going to criticize other people's particular perspective, but looking at this through a Christian lens, Pascal once said, men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from a religious conviction. Um, Jonathan Swift, most of us probably know him as the writer to Gulliver's Travel, but in another generation, he was Dean of Christ Church, the Anglican Church in Dublin, in the southern part of Ireland, who simply said, we have just enough religion to make us hate, but not enough religion to make us love one another. And literally a mile over my right shoulder here, the great Christian apologist C.S. Lewis was born. And Lewis said, I think we must fully face the fact that when Christianity does not make a man very much better, invariably it makes him very much worse. And I often look at the brilliant Jewish theologian Jonathan Sachs, who I think rightly says, on one point, and it is a substantial one, the critics of religion are right. Religion has done harm. It has led to crusades, jihads, inquisitions, and pogroms. It has shed the blood of human sacrifice in the name of high ideals. People have hated in the name of the God of love, practiced cruelty in the name of the God of compassion, waged war in the name of the God of peace, and killed in the name of the God of life. So I really don't do this kind of warm, fuzzy religion where all is well. Religion has been one of the most toxic, destructive forces on planet Earth. And so we need to be honest and face that. You know, bringing people together, I've often said within our context, and I'm not knocking these things, but just bringing Christians together for a kind of kumbaya, hand-holding exercise when people were killing each other in the street. Bless those that were going to do it. But it didn't move the dial. So religious actors, to my mind, need to be in difficult spaces, having uncomfortable conversations. Because I've often said, if you lock 40 men, and sadly it is mostly my gender, if you lock 40 men in a room listening to their own reassuring voices, it's a recipe for disaster. So how do religious actors step into those spaces, have those difficult and comfortable conversations with those who are convinced that political violence or terrorism is the only way forward? In other words, can religion suggest attractive alternative to violence to allow people to move towards their possible political goals? I'll stop there, and 10 minutes is gone, and I'll pass back to you, Geneva, for the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Jerry. So next we'll hear from Freddie, who is a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, during which he lost both parents, 4 sisters, and around 80 members of their extended family. Freddie is the CEO of Agus Trust, an NGO working internationally to prevent genocide and mass atrocities through peace and humanity education, research, and advocacy. He's also the director of the Kigali Genocide Memorial, a final resting place for 250,000 victims of the genocide against the Tutsi, where people can grieve for their lost loved ones and remember them. It also serves as a museum where both local and international visitors can learn about the preparation and execution of genocide and its consequences. He holds an MBA in project management from Maastricht University, a certificate in conflict transformation and global relations, professional practices in peace building from the School of International Training, and a master's in education from the University of Rwanda College of Education. And I will put his full bio in the chat as well. So Freddie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I want to say thank you to Gary. I think this is not the first time we meet on the panel like this one. And I always enjoy listening to you on this topic. So talking about the role of religion and actors in resolving conflict, I may say that here in Rwanda, living in a post-conflict situation, I can see how the religion is really influencing really the recovery of the country, the trauma healing, and people being really been deeply traumatized, deeply wounded, and I can see the region leaders and the region actually is playing a big role to heal the wounded people and Christians and other region people here in this country. And also I can say that the religion leaders are playing a big role in terms of reconciliation, because the division and the social destruction in this country during 1994 genocide against Tutsi was very high. So the process of reconciliation, process of forgiveness, the religion leaders are taking a role on that. Unfortunately, I may say that in Rwanda, the story of religion, the history of religion have played both negative and a positive role in this country. Looking back in the beginning in 1990s, actually beginning of the 20th century, when the first African missionaries came to Rwanda, and they find a country inhabited by three socio-economic groups: the Hutu, the Tutsi, and Twa. The Tutsi being the cattle herders, the Hutu the farmers, and the Twa the fruit gatherers, and they live in the forest. And those people lived together in harmony. They had it was a monarchy country, and everyone respected the king. And the introduction, the Rwandans believe in gods called Imana, but also they believe that the spirit of the dead people can come back and haunt the living, but also the spirits of the dead people can do and solve some problems. When the white missionaries come and they really disagreed, they disapproved this belief and introduced the civilized religion and the Christian religion, and they really managed to convert many Rwandans as possible in a few decades. And 93% before 1994 genocide against Tutsi, 93% were actually converted, and 65% Roman Catholic Church, which played and arrived a little bit before. To get at that point, the conversion process been a kind of a process that really become really painful for Rwandans, because when they come, they played, they connected on a social fabric of Rwandans, and the religion leaders, the white missionaries, they worked with the colonialists to introduce the politics of divide and rule, so that people can be, instead of following the king, who was actually the strong monarchy, they can follow the education that was given by the religions. And this continued by saying even people who believe that they're all Rwandans but they have a different style of living. There came a theory saying that the Tutsi are not Rwandans and the Hutu are not Rwandans. The Tutsi became the maybe descendant of Hamites, and they introduced the Hamitic theories, and coming from Ethiopia and Somalia, and the Tutsi, the Hutu coming from Bantu groups of people coming from Cameroon and others. So that time, the division was implanted in the country. Whether they knew what will be the implication, whether they knew or not, on the goal of getting more followers to follow them, this actually implanted the division between Rwandans. Tutsi were favored, and they given all the privileges, and the Hutu, it is created resentment on the Hutu side. And this is the time that the king who actually tried to oppose on these divisions, he was actually the religion leaders and the colonialists. They removed the king, who were replaced by his son, and his son who converted also dedicated Rwanda to become a Christian country. And then when this king asked for independence in 1959, he was also killed. And then this became a chaotic problems in this country, where the Hutu who was marginalized, now it was a time to form the movement, because the Tutsi were making probably difficult and complicated situation, trying to undermine what the religion leaders and the colonials were doing. So they support the movement of Hutus to oppress the Tutsis, and since 1959, the Tutsi they've been killed, they've been arbitrarily arrested, and this time most of the authorities actually had their religion, but the religion that time didn't prevent this to continue. So this continued to 1994. And while doing that, still 93% were still Rwandan people were religions. So in 1994, the Christians or religion, the believers killed their own brothers and sisters. The priests killed their own fellow priests. And this really was very chaotic, and become like a genocide in 1994 that really targeted the Tutsi that time. I don't see much of the religion role in that tide. So coming aftermath, I appreciated that the religion leaders picked up that time in terms of introducing the trauma healing. And I may say that even the introduction of the reconciliation process and forgiveness process, the priest who had never been involved into this process of hatred and killings, they've been really very much active in terms of healing the nation. I'll give you a very short story, then I stop by there because I want to listen to the listeners if they have questions. One of the bishop who created an organization called the Prison Fellowship, who went and in his colleagues, they went to different prisons and looking to the suspect of genocide, the people who committed genocide and incite them to ask for forgiveness to survivors. And they facilitated the survivors and perpetrators to come together for reconciliation process and forgiveness. This person, this bishop have managed to create a village of reconciliations around, because at the end, those perpetrators have been released and they came back to the village. But they built the houses where we have like the one part of the house is lived by survivor, another part by perpetrator who've been involved in killing the families. And one of the stories is the story of Maria, who lost 7 children during genocide, and Philibert, who was involved in killing those 7 children and killed also the extended members of Maria's family. Today they live together in the same house, and it's really very symbolic. At the same time, there's so many cases that Maria and Philbert represent really the reconciliation process in this country, and these really the role of religion leaders played in this process have been tremendous. So I want to stop by here because I was given 10 minutes, and 10 minutes is very short. You can say whatever, everything you have in mind. As you mentioned, I work for Aegis Trusts, which is a genocide prevention, but also a peace building organization. I'm a survivor, and I've been embraced the process of reconciliation and forgiveness. And recently I met people who killed my family, and for sisters and my parents. His name is Samson, and also Juvenal, who was part of the movement that came to kill my family. So I think the Rwanda is in that direction, and I have to say again that the religion leaders are playing that role to support the country leaders and the politicians to find a way to promote reconciliation and forgiveness in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Freddie. Last but not least, we're going to hear from Samira, who is from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. Being born during the war shaped her 13-year journey in peace building and community organizing. She serves as the regional coordinator for URI multi-region, working with grassroots groups engaged in interfaith peace building, a focus that aligns with her belief in using interfaith collaboration as a powerful tool for building cohesive communities. For 10 years, she has been involved with Youth for Peace, a youth-led organization in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where she currently sits on the board, mentoring young people and empowering them through non-formal education to be agents of positive change. Her international experience includes speaking at Stanford University, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, and the United Nations Peacebuilding Commission, as well as serving as one of the 16 young leaders in the UNDP Global Youth Program, working towards the UN's 2030 agenda. So, Samira, I'm going to turn over to you.
Thanks, Geneva. I'm delighted to join you today. Thank you all for coming. Gary and Freddie, it's always wonderful to hear from both of you, and thank you for opening this this gathering with so many incredibly useful information and highly relevant for the topic that we're discussing. So, as Geneva stated, I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina, which similar to Rwanda and Northern Ireland, and Ireland in that time of the 90s of the previous century has been through a lot. So after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, which used to be a political power here in the Western Balkans, uniting many different nations and creating this above identity of being Yugoslavian, after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, religion came in as a very important, powerful factor. Just to paint a picture of how it was like for religious communities and people who wanted to express their religious affiliation, their spirituality, how that actually looked like for them. So during Yugoslavia, religion was pushed on to the side of the society. It was not present in the society almost at all. If you wanted to be a religious person, to practice your own faith, that pretty much meant that you were not able to hold high-paying jobs, political offices. So you pretty much had a choice, whether you wanted to follow your spiritual path or you wanted to be able to earn decent living, to be able to affect the processes in your community as a politician, and so on and so on. So after the dissolution of Yugoslavia, imagine that so many of these identities, your ethnical, national identity, your religious identity, they're being pressed in a sort of a pressure cooker and locked in for decades, and no one is allowing you to identify the way you want, and everyone is pushing your identity aside. And eventually, when that pressure cooker explodes, you are left with, I think, almost irreparable damage as far as people not understanding who they are, but even more dangerously, who the other people were. The beginning of 90s for us here in the Western Balkans were pretty challenging, and it left damage that I still feel in my daily life. What we've tried to do as young people that were mostly born either during the war, right after the war, or right before the war started, as we try to fix something that we did not break. And we're still trying to fix something that we did not break in a post-conflict country such as Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I would say that I can speak from my experience of a grassroots peace builder, because that's what I do in Bosnia. The work that I do for URI is slightly different. But this grassroots work that I do here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that I've been doing for over 10 years now, really had to do a lot with understanding the humanity in the other person and bringing people to the same table to have a conversation. Youth for Peace was a bit of an experiment. So we wanted to respond to a need that we saw no one was addressing effectively. And that was space for young people to be able to come and talk about the issues that they're facing right now in their lives. But that need was sort of disregarded because you don't even remember the war. The consequences of an armed conflict linger. They stay present in the society for many decades to come. And even today, when I go out and speak to my to participants and to young people that I mentor and that I work with, their initial reaction is to say, I have nothing to do with that conflict. I was born way after all of that was done. And yet 3 questions in, they start to break apart because of the consequences that transgenerational trauma and all of the effects that war leaves on people sort of lives in their DNA and lives in their sort of in the collective memory that we have around here. There have been certain wins and certain defeats when it comes to the ability to embrace interfaith engagement and to use religion as a powerful tool. I believe that Gary and Freddie spoke about how religion can be used for great things, but also, historically speaking, it hasn't been used that well by people that wanted to do good. It was rather manipulated and weaponized to get a lot of harm and damage to so many people around the world. And it was done the same way in Bosnia and Herzegovina. After such a long period of time where religion was outside of the mainstream society, those fringed individuals who wanted to push the narrative that was speaking for the war that was happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Croatia for a few months, in Slovenia for a short amount of time, but then in Bosnia for the longest, for 4 years, they wanted to use the scripture and they wanted to use the inspiration that religion gives to people to sort of get people rallied around an idea of something greater, which meant disappearance of another ethnical group. I come from a community that's called Bosniaks, and we are, well, majority of us are identifying as Muslims. And so in the period between 1992 and 1995, the International Criminal Court in The Hague has proved the intent of ethnic cleansing over my population in so many parts of the world. And just like Freddie, I lost majority of my family during the war that has happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina, including my uncle, well, a few of my uncles, my father, very young children that would grow up to be my cousins. And that has been really an inspiration to me to continue doing this interfaith work and connecting people and making sure that the faith element is not being misused, but rather used as a powerful tool to get people together. Because I truly believe that interfaith doesn't exist just because we want people to come together. Yes, that's a great intention, and I fully support people doing that. Interfaith is a powerful vehicle, because if we truly decide to practice our own faith, there is a higher calling that we are asked to behave in accordance with when it comes to treating others and what we aspire to and what we want to accomplish. And I do have to say that when it comes to religious influence in our society, during the war, we had many religious officials sort of blessing soldiers before going to battle, and many politicians who have later been convicted of genocide in The Hague have received those blessings from their religious officials. And then right after the war, there have been great attempts to consolidate the voice of religious officials from all the local communities. So we have Muslim communities, different types of Muslim communities. We have Roman Catholics, Serbian Orthodox Church, a Sephardic Jewish community here as well, and other minority groups that are present. And I think that those attempts were only, they were limited in the success and what they managed to accomplish, because politics always found way to get inside and sort of mess with people's true intentions. And so the political aspect and very, I would say, very divisive politics managed to separate even sort of the best of initiatives, such as the Inter-Religious Council of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which gathered the highest representatives from these communities. But just recently, a few years ago, one of these communities decided to leave, which still gives you an insight into not into an experiment that wasn't successful, I would say. Speaking from the position of my organization, Youth for Peace, and we are a cooperation circle of URI, and we've been blessed with the opportunity to practice interfaith with so many groups around the world. But somehow still, and it hurts to admit this, it's still sometimes hard to do the internal work that needs to happen. Before, we were able to go around, speak to young people, speak to teachers, speak to former soldiers and military commanders, and do this peace building work that we wanted to do. We had to look inwards, and we had to do a lot of internal peace building, and sort of as a team of people, young people that gathered from many different communities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we really had to have a lot of difficult conversations and unpack a lot of different narratives, which are quite contrary to historical facts. And that took time. And I have to say that process is still not over. It still is hard to unpack some of these narratives that have been bothering and sort of separating our communities for so long, and lack of uniformed history and sort of one truth that really represents objectively what has happened is creating a lot of issues 30 years after the Dayton Peace Accord was signed. When people ask me whether Bosnia and Herzegovina is a successful example or not successful, I would say that we're somewhere in the middle. There are great lessons that can be learned when it comes to faith engagement, role of religious actors, and peace building in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But also, we have failed to produce a long-lasting positive peace. I live in a country that lives in a very negative peace situation at the moment, and I have to say that it's never fully comfortable, because we have history that is incredibly burdened by past, and if we've learned anything from the past, is that it just find its way back somehow. So that's my 10 minutes, just briefly telling you a little bit more about my context and about grassroots perspective, but certainly if there are any other questions, I would be honored to answer them.
Thank you, Samira. Thank you to all three of our panelists. So now I just want to open it up for questions. So feel free to raise your hand or to write a question or comment in the chat. I also welcome the panelists to respond to each other if there's something, an additional comment you'd like to make as well.
Yeah, could I?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, you talked about your experience with the people. My question is that after hearing the Gary and from the Rwanda, all the things, what happened about genocide, the conflict and all that. This is the main concern about the future of young generation. The Palestinian, Israel, Rwanda genocide, or in Ireland and all that. That what the leaders are thinking in terms of getting any solution for the young generation, for their future, they have something to offer or not.
So I'm happy enough to take that. I have an emerging young leaders group of British, Irish, and Israelis and Palestinians. I'm not a young person, although my kids are a lot younger than me. I think that generation are quite distrustful of what I would define as institutional religion. And I can understand why. I think some of the reasons is that institutions, almost their instinctive reaction is to protect the institution rather than honor the individual. So I look at in the Christian context, so I'm not criticizing Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, or Judaism. I'll deal with my own house. Child sex abuse scandals are a classic example. The instinctive reaction of the church was to protect the institution, not to remedy the actual causes of what was happening. And so for the younger generation, I don't think they're kind of anti-God or anti-spirituality or anti-faith. I mean, I had dinner with a group of colleagues last night, some philanthropists and some just local activists, talking to a woman, I guess, late 30s. And I mean, I quite openly said to her, and she said, that's how I see it. I hold God very tightly, but I do hold the church quite loosely. And I've worked for the church for 35 years of my life. So I'm cautious around institutional religion. I know we need the structures, but who are the structures accountable to, apart from themselves? I mean, we've moaned for years about medical doctors investigating medical doctors, rightly so, but the church has done exactly the same. So
The
that's just my initial thoughts. So let others come in and I'll debate. More than happy that happens.
thing is that most of the religions, they talk about the peace. But in practice, are they implementing the idea of peace or not? That is the question.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think many times, I could bring my other colleagues in. I mean, I can say categorically, many men of my generation in the 70s, when we were younger kids, took up guns. I mean, these kids are 15, 16, and 17, not exactly skilled assassins, but they took up guns because of toxic religious language, or to quote Jonathan Sachs again, linguistic violence. I mean, Freddie alluded to that. So this is not a kind of Northern Irish phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon. We're exploitive religious actors. I mean, Alan, I could bring you in. You're sitting in Jerusalem, and you know some of the language that's happening now there within West Bank in a kind of, religious context, etc., etc. So this is not a new phenomenon. But I think we all kind of ask, are religious actors going to have the courage to address it? Some do, but many don't. Freddie, I mean, you alluded to exactly the same thing.
Thank you.
David, do you have your hand up?
Yes, yes. Well, thank you to all three of the speakers. Your stories are just, I'm in awe of, the difficulties and challenges you've had. Gary, I've had some theological training in a Methodist theological school myself, and one of the lessons I remember that I thought about as you talked is they said the church is not the only institution behind the times. It's just usually further ahead and being behind than most. So I thought that was a good thing to think about. But I'm wondering, we have a genocide going on in Gaza right now. From your experiences, should the church be doing more? I mean, I think back in my own experience in the Wounded Knee crisis, where the Methodists actually, with Jim Armstrong, took leadership and placed bodies in between the combatants. And I think of my involvement in Clergy and Laity Concerned that mobilized a 1.5 million people to march in one day, in Washington and San Francisco. I just don't see any actions happening. And in fact, URI, which I'm a part of, one of the founding members, they haven't even made a statement that this war is wrong. I mean, what needs to happen that isn't happening?
I mean, Freddie, Samira, do you want to come in on that there? I mean, I'm happy to make a comment, but there are other voices in the room apart from mine.
Yeah, I'm happy to step in here. David, thank you for bringing that question up. And I think that it's hard for me because I sit here with two separate hats on my head. There's always a difference the way I perceive things from my grassroots perspective, and then trying to support all of these different communities and groups around the world who are just genuinely trying to do their best. What I see happening right now between Israel and Palestine, and what has been happening, it isn't just now. I remember meeting the first Palestinian refugees in Bosnia when I was just a teenager. And I remember seeing dialogue sessions happening in the local synagogue between these Palestinian kids and local Jewish population, and trying to sort of welcome them into their own city where Jewish population has always been welcomed since their expulsion from Spain and being welcomed by the Ottoman Empire in the Western Balkans. Never experienced atrocities at hands of anyone but the Nazi Germany when they came over here and conquered the entire region. What I see right now happening in the West Bank and happening in Gaza is heartbreaking. The thing that is different between the context that I have seen in my country, I don't remember anything. I was born in 1994, but that transgenerational trauma lives through my mom and all the loss that I've experienced in life, and the fact that there was no father on my wedding day to sort of celebrate that with me. And so that stays on, that never disappears. And what I'm most concerned about today is that if we think that we have an issue with different groups that one side might characterize as resistance, the other side might characterize as terrorists, and whether Israel is committing the acts of genocide or whether it is enforcing its right to defend itself, we can all have conversations about that. But the thing that concerns me right now the most is the future that awaits the people in that region, because the consequence that we see now, the immediate sort of aftermath of atrocities that are happening in the world, we see that right now. But what happens in 20, 30, 40, 50 years after such a trauma is experienced by a population is what terrifies me. And I come from an organization, I'm very proud of URI and the work that URI is able to do with its own limitations. And one thing that I have appreciation, and often we state is happening now, but I'm afraid that our religious communities, our politicians are not really concerned about the long run of human life. They're sort of in charge, and they are focusing on the long run of their policies, political interests, whatever it might be. But human life is just like yet another thing, like, well, it happened. And I am disappointed. I am disappointed on behalf of mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters whose family members have been missing for so long, in captivity, and God knows whether they're alive or not. But I'm also heartbroken for the Palestinian community that has been going through this not since October 7th. It has been going on for such a long time. And if I've learned anything from the experience of my family, is that the loss that we experience today never goes away. It never goes away. And I think all of this is sort of in vain. Lives are just disappearing every single day. But I still have a little bit of hope left, just a tiny little bit, that the situation all of a sudden will stop and things will change. But we as human beings do not have the capability of learning a lesson once something happens. The history always comes around and it repeats itself, and it repeats itself all the time. And it's not just between Israel and Palestine, it's between so many communities around the world. But because of high political sort of pressure in the region, and so many outside of the state of Israel and the Palestinian Authority and Gaza, there's so many other powers that are involved in here. And no one dares to do anything, or no one wants to do anything. I don't know, but I don't have a power to unfortunately change much. What I can do is continuously call on people to question what they see, to ask of themselves a higher standard of behavior. Hate speech is something that concerns me very much, and I can do something. At least I have my presence in the online spaces where I can intervene and where I can help people understand the consequences of what they might be saying. It always starts from words, but then words become so much more dangerous. I'm speaking from my heart when I respond to your question, David, and I understand where you're coming from, and I understand what you want to see in the world. And you've been voicing your concerns for a while when it comes to this particular conflict. I fully understand that. And because I'm speaking from the heart, my thoughts might not be as coherent as I'd like them to be, but I hope that my message and my emotion is coming through to you, and that it provides some sort of answer, because I am helpless, and it's not a good feeling to have. If I was able to do more, I would, but right now I'm helpless. I just don't want to do more land acknowledgements in the future, and to have the same experience that I had when we visited Freddie in Rwanda last year in June, when we went to the Kigali Genocide Memorial, to stand in a place that holds 250,000 bodies, and to go into a room that contains photos of children that have been murdered during the genocide. And in like underneath some of these photos, it says favorite food, mother's milk, because they're not even a year old. And I see that on my screen happening daily.
The role of religious actors in solving conflicts, lessons learned from Srebrenica, Rwanda, and Northern Ireland.
I think that might have been someone's computer, sorry. Does anyone else want to jump in on that question? Gary, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, David, I work in an organization in the States, and our motto is pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, pro-peace. It's an incredibly complex situation. There's no question about that. I think some of the key people that I've read and whom I know are, interestingly, and Alan, you would know this better than I would, it's people who have fought the war, know the pain of war, many times in a way that politicians don't. I have a friend, Amos Yadlin, who was the head of IDF intelligence, directed INSS, an institution. He wrote a brilliant article in Foreign Affairs.
And cookie preferences. says.
saying, let's call a ceasefire and let's begin a peace process. So sometimes the people that fought the war know the pain of war. I know in my space, many of our key peace activists were people who fought the war. But sometimes other people, particularly in the political sphere, in my space and many other spaces, wanted the war to continue for their own selfish reasons. And that happens time after time after time. And, you know, I look back, I mean, particularly from my tradition, and I have no difficulty saying the church paved the way for the Holocaust of the Shoah. No question about that. I did an interview and Haritzen said that quite publicly, got it in the neck from some religious actors in England, which I was delighted to take, but I stand over that. I mean, there's a book called 6 Million Crucifixions by a Jewish scholar called Gabriel Walensky. Very firmly says that the church paved the way for the Holocaust. I mean, we have a writer here, James Joyce, who said, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to recover. And I think all of us would acknowledge that. I mean, I think all of us, particularly my generation, looked at my kids in their 30s. I mean, when Russia invaded Ukraine, our second oldest texted me and said, Dad, is there going to be a nuclear war? Never in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought a kid of mine would text me that. But we're in a very precarious place globally. And I mean, I'm a very optimistic person, but I think many of us are concerned for the future. And I think religious actors need to be not fanning the flames of hate and destruction. They should be dealing with this and coming together to deal with it, even though they don't agree theologically. But they should agree with saving life, which is crucial for any faith-based person.
Thank you, Gary and Samira. We have a question in the chat. What are some of the things that you found to be most effective in helping society understand and remember our common humanity and shared security in the face of the trauma that can drive cycles of violence? I welcome anyone to jump in on that. Maybe Freddie, we haven't heard from you. I don't want to put you on the the hot seat if you don't want to respond, but
Thank you very much for the question. The question was long, but I'm not sure that I get it quite well, actually, looking at what's most effective way to, if I understand very well, actually, in the face of trauma and the you know, the situation, what the effective way of doing what? Can I repeat a little bit?
sure. It says, what are some of the things that you found to be most effective in helping society understand and remember our common humanity and shared security in the face of the trauma that can drive cycles of violence? So how do we help everyone recenter our common humanity amidst conflict and trauma? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think what looking at what our experience here in Rwanda, it's the first thing is that right after genocide, let's say that the survivors find themselves really hopeless, and the trauma was really very high in Rwanda. But what actually helped us to continue the process is that desire of trying to understand and through education, not only education that's really teaching about numeracy and you know, like literatures and the sciences, is trying to understand, looking at actually those survivors who can really come together and mainly the survivors. What happened, what helped us actually is to find ourselves and sit down together and cry together, but at the same time actually having that sense of thinking that what will be our future in that time. So I think the survivors and the here in Rwanda have supported really other survivors while they really bringing the empathy between survivors and with a common interest in terms of looking what will be the future of us. And in that time, having survivors, those who could be able to try even to demystify what happened to us, that it's very, very important to that you, because people right after genocide and mass atrocities like that, you feel that you're in a confusion and a situation that will happen to us. But when you have any way to demystify and understand what happened to you and the way the process, it really helps in terms of and trauma healing. But at the same time, the when you get in Rwanda, we're very lucky that survivors were given space to remember, to commemorate, and also to cry for our families. And when you get really time to mourn your situation, the mourning period have been really helping so many survivors to really overcome the pain, if I can say. So most of the things that I want to say is understanding your own situation and what happened to you, but also taking time to of mourning, and that been very, very helpful among survivors, if I can say. And other things, actually, I may say that this is not best practice. All depend on the situation you're living in, but having survivors supporting each other, it's very, very helpful. But the same, another thing is the political will to overcome the challenges, because most of the situation around the world, we have many politics and that really keeps supporting the ideology that led to mass atrocities and others. But having that political space that helps survivors to talk from their heart and learn what happened to them, but at the same time give them a space to express themselves, release the anger that live in their mind, that really helps. But at the same time, if you have a political space that really keep the oppression of the survivors, then it become more difficult and complex to overcome the trauma, and the healing become more difficult. So the political leaders really play a big role in healing the nation and healing the wounded cases on the survivors. But at the same time, the survivors themselves, they help each other as well.
Thank you, Freddie. We have another question from Sarah. What has been your experience in bringing skeptical people to the table for interfaith dialogue or peace building work? And I open this to any one of our panelists to respond.
Yeah, I don't mind starting on this one. At times we had to be really creative when it comes to bringing young people to the table to have these conversations, or even inviting teachers to be a part of certain dialogue sessions. In certain instances, we didn't even call what we were working on as interfaith dialogue. We would say that it is an identity on narrative deconstruction. And so people come because they are interested in learning more about narrative deconstruction, but then when they come to the workshop, they have to deal with the real sort of narratives that live around them. That has been a part of our strategy, trying to get people inside. But when it comes to like skeptical people, I believe that the only strategy that has worked for us is investing enough time. When it comes to like peace building in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have been rushed to start focusing on the future rather than dealing with the past. And so The Dayton Peace Accord was signed in 1995, and in 1997, on the country level, we got a huge grant from the United Nations to speak about focusing on the future. Just 2 years after a bloody war that has happened in my country. So that certainly did not help, and that did not work because people didn't have enough time to go through the trauma and deal with everything they've been through. In order to have a dialogue, a genuine dialogue, that takes a lot of time. It's not one conversation that you have with an individual sitting and speaking about the weather. It's building trust, it's creating atmosphere that is appropriate, and so many other things. So when speaking to skeptical individuals, I would say for us, timing and allowing people to sort of to come to one session and then be gone for a while and then invite them back and just give them more time to be able to process what they've learned, what they've experienced. So that would be something that certainly worked, that has worked for us, just being patient with people and giving them space. The change doesn't happen over just one tea or coffee. It takes longer.
Thank you, Samira. Does anyone else want to respond to that question? Or a comment on any of the other questions that were previously discussed?
I would add, historically, the URI was challenged with that very issue. How do you bring interfaith people together to the table to create such an organization? And Bishop Swing tells the story that in the initial stages, he went around the world talking to all the religious leaders, the Pope, the high level people in Islam and Judaism, Hinduism, every religion you can think of. And it was the Dalai Lama that said to him that because he was getting very frustrated answers, they all said this would be good to have people talk to each other, but we have other agendas and we don't have time and it's not a priority. And the Dalai Lama said, do it with the youth. And once the youth do it, the others will watch and then they'll join on. And that's exactly what happened. So that might be one of the strategies we might want to revisit when we're having these barriers of bringing people to the table for interfaith roundtable discussions.
Thank you for that comment, David. Does any of our panelists have anything else to add?
Maybe just something that was sparked by David's comment. Thank you for bringing that story in, David, here. One thing that I have learned through my experience in civil society and as a facilitator of peace building work is that people are more prone to working with people who are different rather than talking to people about challenging conversations. And so a helpful tool that comes in here is dialogue of action, where you get to work with people on a common topic that bothers your community. It doesn't have to be whether your faith teaches you about the same thing or whatever it might be, but you're trying to solve a particular problem in your community and your faith is inspiring you to do that. That I think is an interesting sort of place to start from. And it certainly is a powerful tool, a transformative tool to have interfaith used in such a way. So trying to get people to work together before you sit them down and have them have all of these incredibly tough conversations, dig through the past or anything else. So trying to do community work together certainly helps.
The conceptual and ideological foundation of interfaith is to cultivate culture of peace, love, and harmony. I have been very involved in Canada for 50 plus years in the interfaith movement. We are creating an atmosphere, environment, awareness about the love and respect for each others. And that is helping little bit. People are coming out and sharing their uh, their their experiences and how we can do and implement that. We talk lot but little bit less in action. That's what we need. There is a more action oriented workshop.
Thank you for that comment. Do any of our panelists have anything else to add? And I also invite any additional questions. We have a couple more minutes. No one has any additional questions? Okay, well, I will ask a question and maybe we can use this to bring us into a kind of a closing discussion. All of you have kind of mentioned ways that religion has been a contributor to conflict. So as we are here gathered in interfaith space, I'm wondering, how can religious actors respond to and counteract the misuse of religion and religious rhetoric to incite violence or to justify conflict? And also, how can religious actors maintain political neutrality while engaging in conflict resolution? Because I do think this is something we struggle to navigate in interfaith spaces as well, particularly around highly polarized discussions like Israel-Palestine. So I offer that as maybe some closing thoughts of how we can kind of collectively navigate this in an interfaith space.
I often say, I chair an island-wide dialogue group and often quote the New York Times journalist Bret Stephens, who's one of the more conservative journalists there for the New York Times, but he says, in order to disagree well, you need to understand well. So I think a lot of these processes are not kind of nebulously pushing everyone to exactly the same worldview of religion, but it's creating an understanding or humanizing how another person came to that particular perspective. I think also church leaders, in my perspective, or synagogue leaders, or mosque leaders, or temple leaders, also need to be able to hold the tension of competing views together. I think too many religious actors work on the assumption that everything that I believe is an absolute. I think most of us, within Christianity, like even Paul, it was pretty certain of what he believed, but he still had the courage to say, I see a lot of life through a glass darkly. So there's still a mystery about life. But sometimes the arrogance of religious actors is we have all the answers to everything. We actually don't. We just simply don't. For me, growing up in the Christian tradition, I will never understand the riddle of suffering. I've looked at it theologically, philosophically, psychologically. I've read numerous books on it. My life is spent trusting God in the dark. And I just wish others would say the same. So I think we need less arrogance and more mystery. We don't have all the answers to life. And I think because of that, we need a respect of relationships and traditions to allow that to happen.
Yeah, I don't mind going next. That's a great question, Geneva. There was a research done at the University of Sarajevo a few years ago, and students from the age of 18 to 24 were asked about who they trust the most, a vast majority of respondents said that they trust their parents first, and second, their religious sort of leaders. And so there is a big responsibility that is put in the hands of religious leaders. And I'm not quite sure, speaking from the local context, I'm not sure that they quite understand what type of responsibility they have first, and second, what type of an opportunity exists to use their Friday sermons, Sunday sermons, whatever the format of the message might be, to share messages that would actually help the community move forward rather than to be stuck in the past with all of these harmful political games and narratives that are going around. So I think that they're not aware of their responsibility whatsoever, and they're not aware of what type of opportunity they really have to bring about change, how much trust they enjoy, some rightfully so, but some just because of their title, what they have. And I'm not sure many of them are using it to the full extent to bring about good.
Just to say that, Samira, you just say that because I think there's also a lack of coordination of doing good and support the good things to be done in the communities. I agree most of what Gary said about religion leaders trying to protect their own institutions, and then they rely on something that they don't believe in most of the time. In Rwanda, we have seen the churches really trying to advance the political interests instead of really fighting the evil and fighting what is really oppressing the people and they make people victims. And I'm thinking that some of the religion leaders tend to be neutral in the situation of conflict. You said that, Geneva, that there is cases of religion leaders becoming much more neutral. And one of the things they want to really to hide themselves and not saying anything to protect their own institutions. But and I was thinking that this was really, it's something that what Samira is talking about, they don't have an idea how influential they can be. And when they coordinated, when they raise their voices, and how they can really change things to happen. So I think maybe I don't know what to do, but I think it's encouraging the religion leaders to speak out in the situation like this one, and actually even try to clarify their role and their power and their authority in the communities. It's very, very important. But also the coordination is also very good to understand how can they do together. For example, when you say you hear actually the Roman Catholic priest talking about that we need to fight this, we need to do this. Do Protestant churches support exactly, or there's any sort of coordination to look at different regions and do something in common? I have seen one of the case really appreciated how the regions, different denomination coordinated their actions in the Central Africa Republic in 2013 where I went, having the Archbishop, the Roman Catholic Church, and then the president of Protestant churches, and then also the imam. That time, the country was in the war. There was no state, and the militias were the Christians and the Muslims were killing each other. So the fact they came together and they hold their hands together on television and go village by village and say, we are the same, we are Central African people. We had shared a country, share values, share language, we share everything. It worked. It stopped the killings. Some of the religious leaders, some of the militias who belong to different religions, they saw their leaders and say, if you can hold the hand of Muslim and you're Christian, why should I really raise my machete and kill my neighbor? So it worked. That shows how they have authority, they have influence, and they have also power to stop all those things happening. They need to be aware about this one. Thank you and for your inspiring comments.
Thank you, Freddie. And I think that's an somewhat uplifting place for us to stop, right? And we're about almost exactly 1/2 past now. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I want to thank all three of our panelists, Gary, Samira, and Freddie, for your wonderful insight, to all of our participants for this great discussion. This was recorded, so I will send this out to everyone who registered as well. And please feel free to share with your networks. And thank you to our co-sponsor, the Greater Kansas City Interfaith Council. I know Alan had to step off a bit early, but I do want to recognize their partnership in this. I will allow anyone on the panel to say any closing remarks if you like. If you wish, you don't have to, but I will give space for that if you would like to say any final words.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone, speakers, and organizing this kind of dialogue. I have to be excused now.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time and for coming to hear what we had to say. Good luck with all that you do in the future. And Gary just wanted to be the first one to avoid you having to go first to say goodbye.
Bye, Samira. Bye, Gary. Samira, welcome back to Kigali.
Good night, everyone. Good night.
I look forward to one day. Yes. Thank you all. Bye.